My husband and I moved up here in 1983. We actually got married in the spring and moved up here in the fall, so last year was a 30th anniversary year in multiple ways. I actually joined the fire department shortly after I moved up here, so I've been on the fire department for 30 years as well. The Rist Canyon Volunteer Fire Department has always been all volunteer, all donation based, so everybody, board of directors, all the firefighters, the fire chief, Bob has been fire chief for more than 20 years and does untold number of hours, but every project anybody does for the fire department, nobody gets paid for it. We all do it out of our sense of community, love of the job, whatever motivates people. Everybody carries a pager. I have one on my hip right now, and the pager went off and it was a smoke report. And, you know, that's happened in 30 years 1,000 times, you know. We get smoke reports all the time. It's like, oh yeah, you know, I better go. So, but somehow, my husband was going to town that morning, and somehow we had a sense that it was worse. I don't know, because it was dry, whatever. I said, why don't you take the dog with? You know, that was just one of those things that you just, and sure enough, by the time he got done in town and he looked to the west and there's, you know, the giant plume, he came home, evacuated the stuff he needed to evacuate and was gone. It was a huge issue about finding it. It was, I don't know if you heard that story. We had 3 or 4 different crews approaching it from different directions. Over there in the west side of our territory, there's all kinds of little dirt tracks and old trails and cow trails and things. And myself and one other firefighter had actually gone as far as we could up the old Flowers Road up behind Stove Prairie School. And we landed in a meadow, parked the truck, and we're actually hiking up a hill and to see if we could get to it. Turns out if we had made it to the crest of that hill, we would have figured out that it was on the back of the next hill, that was really not the way to get at it. And another guy was coming in around from Paradise Park, and one of our firefighters happens to live off the Buckhorn up that way, and he went exploring on his ATV and found a way in on this little 2-track. And so we're halfway hiking up this hill, and we get the radio call. It's like, Paul's found a way in, it's 2 acres in a meadow, blah, blah, blah. So we hike back down to the truck and drive back around and go at it that way. And interestingly enough, I still have this picture on my bulletin board. The Coloradoan had a picture the next day in the paper of that hill fully engulfed in flames. And I often thought that that would have been a really bad way. You know, if we'd all hiked in that way, I don't even want to think about what situation we might have been in. But yeah, the hill we were hiking on that morning burned catastrophically 3 or 4 hours later. You know, as it turns out, because we were able to drive to it, there was a pond in that meadow. We had water, we had resources, we had air support. We just couldn't stop it. The wind, you know, the wind gets the upper hand, and not much you can do about it. That was the most air support I've actually seen on a small fire ever in my years in the fire department. I think there was 2 helicopters and a single engine air tanker, and it was a little fire in a meadow. Now, everybody knew the conditions were really bad, and mostly it was in a meadow, few torching trees, and we were doing what firefighters do. You're anchoring it at the head of the fire, coming around it, trying to cut it off, and it got into the trees at the edge of at the other side of the meadow. And pretty soon we're all going, well, I had firefighters on my crew who lived in Paradise Park, which would have been the first, and up, what's the road behind Stove Prairie School? Like Sky Corral Ranch and those places. And those guys are looking at me going, I need to go make sure my place is okay. You know, we started releasing people that realized, and then we're going, we need to start evacuating. This is not what we need to be doing. It's not going to help us to have a fire line here when the fire's running that way. So we moved into evacuation mode pretty quickly, and the rest of the day, that's all we did. We've actually done some training since then, because that may be one thing we could have done a little better. We didn't have a magic system where people didn't go back to the same house 2 or 3 times. You know, like we'd go check out a road, and then we'd meet a sheriff deputy later, and they'd say, oh, I just checked out that road, there's nobody up there. Yeah, we did that, you know. And so since we've gotten some special flagging tape and some protocols, and we've trained with them, so hopefully we can do that a little more organized. But it was organized chaos for sure. My daughter was getting married 16th, a week after the fire started, up in Estes Park, and I fought fire for 4 or 5 days, left Friday, the Friday after the fire started. Friday, Saturday, I was up in Estes Park doing the wedding, came back to the fire line on Sunday and started all over again. So it was pretty nuts. Interestingly enough, they said when I left, they're going, Carol, go get some rest. We need you when you get back. I couldn't sleep in Estes Park, not knowing what was going on, worrying about my firefighters, my firefighters. I get possessive sometimes. I get accused of being Rist Canyon mom. So, just worrying about the guys and that everybody was safe and all that. I slept horribly up there. I got much better sleep when I was here crashing for a few hours in the fire truck than I did, just knowing what was going on, maybe the control freak in me, I don't know. But yeah, the wedding went off without a hitch. It was a beautiful day, and we took a picture at the end of the wedding of me in the dress that I had bought for the wedding, and my daughter in her, her beautiful white gown, and her new husband in his tuxedo, and I put on my fire shirt over the dress. So that's been sort of our statement from the wedding. So we were down at Stowe Prairie School, and I'm watching this huge plume of smoke engulf this ridgetop, and I just assumed my house was gone. I was operating under that assumption. And then that Monday, when the things had started to quiet down a little bit, and we decided it was safe to come back here. You drove through a few spots when you're driving down the driveway where it's absolute, there's not a tree standing. It was absolute devastation, so you're driving through that. And then there's places where it's good, and there's places. So when I crested the hill over here, it turns out we lost 2 sheds, a wood shed and another one. Those were still smoldering, but I could see the garage, and I came around the corner and saw the house. It was amazing. And we actually put out spot fires around the house that day when we came up here. It wasn't like the fire wasn't right here, but it was on the ground and just kind of creeping around, and we put out those spot fires, and like everybody else, we continued to check all the houses for weeks and weeks, because that was what was crazy about that fire, is it burned 80,000 acres in 2 days and left behind 10,000 spot fires that we had to watch. And we lost, you hear can you see the house behind me? Can you see what he's, just through the trees a little bit. We lost that house, and I told you the story that a week, 10 days into the fire, because we couldn't control one of those spot fires. And, and it was heartbreaking to all of us, because we thought we'd lost our last house, and we lost one more. I've said this 100, maybe 1,000 times in the last 2 years. Between the fires 2 years ago and last year's floods, if any of the previous 28 years has been as hard as the last 2, I'm not sure I would have made it 30 years. Really challenging just in terms of time management. A volunteer job is one thing if it's, so many hours, a couple hours here, a couple hours there. 3 weeks straight of firefighting and trying to hold down your regular job. And oh, by the way, I'm married and have kids and grandkids, and, I have a life, but it was just chaos, and everybody was in the same chaos.